Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to Late Night Hockey with Steven Psihogios. I'm Steven Psihogios, and I'm very pleased to be joined by my guest at this time, none other than the one, the only Victor Findlay. And Victor, enjoy the compliments while I'm giving them because you know that they don't last long.
I don't get many from you at all,
No.
so this is a big deal.
Yeah, so enjoy them while you get them. Victor, thanks so much for coming to the show. How you doing?
Man, I'm happy to be here. We haven't done something I think together like properly since Rams Live, right? At
Yeah,
Ryerson.
yeah.
Like, am I missing something here? We've never really done a collab or a project since then. So
No, yeah, it was you, me, Drew Goble, Jackson
yeah,
Jacobs, the squad back then
maybe
for the
you got to do this one time where we just have a Rams Live reunion. Bring in all
yeah,
the broadcasters from Rams Live again on Steven's little show. We just talk.
yeah, yeah. We could even take over the intermissions during Rams game. Just go live
Yeah,
during the
exactly.
intermissions and just relive the past. So, nonetheless, Victor, I'm so happy to have you on the show. Weeks removed from your first ever NHL play-by-play experience, Victor, walk through that from start to finish. What was that like for you, man? I know it was something that I was very happy to hear that you were getting the opportunity to do. So tell us what that opportunity was like.
Well, as a 12-year-old kid of, Oshawa, Ontario, dreaming to be an NHL commentator, I always knew I'd call my first game in the middle of a global pandemic. So, yeah, it wasn't how I pictured it as a kid, that's for sure. I mean, for those who don't know, I was in Ottawa calling that game off a monitor, and the game was happening in Montreal. So TSM flew me from Toronto to Ottawa for a game that was happening in Montreal. So, how we tangled in three different Canadian cities in there, it was kind of funny. Definitely not how I pictured it growing up, but yeah, I mean, it was awesome. That's the call you've always been waiting for as a commentator. I haven't had to wait for it that long, to be honest. I mean, there's been a lot of people that have waited a lot longer than I have to get that opportunity. So I feel pretty lucky, and there's a lot of people I got to thank for getting me to that point. Whether it was stops at Rogers TV, Ryerson, of course, Mississauga, Peterborough. I mean, just so many other places too I've been through where I've encountered a lot of really helpful people. So certainly a lot to be thankful for there. But yeah, the experience was awesome. It was a little different calling off a monitor, but I've called Champions Hockey League games, probably a good 30 of those at least now, off a monitor before as well. So, at the end of the day, hockey's hockey, right? So I've called over 200 or 200 games before, let alone NHL games. And when you get into an NHL broadcast booth or on an NHL concourse with a 50-inch monitor in front of you, like I was in this case, it's still hockey, right? It doesn't matter if it's Ryerson games or OHL games or Junior A games. The only thing that really changes at the end of the day is the numbers and names and logos on the jerseys, right? So hockey's still hockey, and it was just a lot of fun for me. So I had a chance to work with some excellent people, just super talented crew, which is always a pleasure, and I look forward to doing it again soon.
It must have been a little strange though, because you pull up to the arena and it's
Yeah.
empty. Like there's nobody there at the arena because you're calling it in Ottawa and the game's in Montreal. So that's got to be a little strange, right? Like usually when you're calling a game on play by play, obviously you've done it off a monitor as well, but when you're in the arena, you're
Right.
expecting
Well,
that atmosphere.
when I do the games off a monitor for Champions Hockey League, I'm at the TSN studios,
Right.
so we're just off the set of Jay and Dan. So it feels like you're not there. You're not there, right? When I showed up to
Right.
Ottawa, you're right. It was weird because I took the cab, and by the way, never realized how far the rink actually is. I know people from Ottawa complain about that all the time. Now I get it. It's like a half-hour cab ride from downtown Ottawa, where I was, like right across the road from Parliament Hill, to Canada, to get to the Canadian Tire Center. So it's a long way, but I got there and yeah, showed up to the rink. The ice is there, like all the seating is there, the jumbotron's there, and no one else is. And it's just our little TSN camp up on the concourse. So that was a little strange for sure. I mean, I've seen some empty rinks in my time for sure, but usually I'm not showing up ready to get to call a game in one of them. So unique experience though. And at the end of the day, when I look back at my first NHL call, it's going to be a bit of a unique story, right? How I managed to do it in the middle of a global pandemic. So not many people are going to be able to say that their first NHL call came under those circumstances.
No, yeah, definitely memorable. And you got the call with the Sens on TSN. The Sens, obviously, not a year where they're expected to make the playoffs or make a really deep run. Still in the middle of a rebuild right now, but you've been following the team obviously up to and since you called the game. What are your thoughts on this Sens team so far? They've had a lot of fight. I'd say in a
Yeah.
lot of the games they've played this year, they don't back down. They're a high shooting team too. In a lot of games, they're like tight loss losers where they just can't seem to get the finish on those on those chances. But what have you made of this Sens team so far?
Well, I got the call to call that game about a week and a half before. So the first full length Senators game I watched this year was their first game against Vancouver, and I was just watching like the worst stretch of Ottawa Senators hockey so far this season leading up to the call. So I'm like, oh man, here we go. And Montreal was rolling, right? So kind of funny that it turned out to be a 3-2 Ottawa win because the trend certainly was not
Both
in
teams
favor of
were in
that.
different directions.
Yeah, completely different directions. But if we knew how the games were going to turn out before we played them, we wouldn't bother playing them to begin with. So, yeah, I agree with you, Steve. I think Ottawa, there's a lot of fight in the team, especially the forward group. I really like some of the pieces they have there. They're young. Comparatively, though, to the rest of the North Division, I mean, like every single night they're punching up. Like they're not better than another team in that North Division. Having said that, I mean, I think you could say pretty safely that they can beat anyone in the North Division because they've already beat Toronto, they've already beat Montreal, they beat Winnipeg. I absolutely think that they can beat the Edmonton Oilers and Calgary Flames as well. So, they're not, and Vancouver Canucks as well, I should add into that. So I think Ottawa is raw in a lot of ways. Up the middle, they're super young, right? Let's put Stepan aside for a moment, but you've got Colin White. You've got Josh Norris, look to the minors in Belleville. You've got Logan Brown. So they're pretty young up the middle. And the big thing, certainly in the week leading up to the game I called against Montreal, was the defense was just all over the place. And they've managed to settle that down a little bit with getting Christian Wolanin back into the lineup. Artem Zub has been a real stable acquisition since coming into the lineup as well for the Ottawa Senators. So that's helped even things out a little bit. And they're getting saves from the goaltenders now, too. Marcus Hogberg obviously had a really, really bad stretch, but rebounded with a nice win against Winnipeg. And then Matt Murray's been better as well. So I still think for Ottawa that their biggest deficiency is on defense. They need to find a way to iron out the consistency there. I think in their last game without Shabbat, Leafs scored 7 goals, I think, in
Yeah.
that game. Yeah.
Yeah.
So like that was a game where you could tell Shabbat wasn't in the lineup. Like they have some good puck moving defensemen, especially with Eric Brandstrom and I guess Mike Riley, neither of which are as good as Shabbat. But even defensively, when it comes to just playing defense, I still think Shabbat's their best all-round defenseman. So I think he needs more support still. So they're a couple pieces away, without a doubt, from their blue line being where it needs to be. And I think they're going to need some of their young guns to really develop as well to have a solid forward unit. With guys like Alex Formanton, obviously Tim Stützle and Drake Batherson in there too. But I like watching Ottawa. Yeah, I don't think they're an awful dumpster fire of a team, even though the record isn't very good. I just think it's a product of playing teams that are better than they are every single night. But they fight and they've managed to make some games pretty watchable against teams that might otherwise steamroll them pretty easy. So, and they have been steamrolled a couple times this year, but there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of quit in this Ottawa team, at least from what I see.
I agree. Like you said, getting beaten up badly a couple nights. The other night against Toronto, Hogberg gets hurt. They have to put Murray in on back-to-back nights. Never an ideal situation. So you're going to get those when you're in a rebuild, right? Like that's just part of taking your lumps and trying to just play and work through it. But I agree. I think the core that they have of young players is really solid, and give it some time. They're doing the right thing. They're building through the draft, and they're acquiring strong assets. Like Stützle looks like he's going to be a real player. He's had
Oh,
some great
I
flashes.
love Tim Stützle, Steve. Everyone's raving about the way he's playing now, which is kind of easy to do because he's putting up points. But what I really like about Tim Stützle is that he's a gamer. Like he goes out there and it's 100% effort. Like this guy clearly wants to win. Like he digs in. He's a battler, and I'm interested to see how Ottawa, because the plan for them is to make him a center. they want him to be their number one center. So I'm interested to see how that transition works. I like where they've got him on the wing right now. He played the wing in Mannheim as well last year. So center would be a bit of a different change for him. So if they can get him to win faceoffs, I don't think there's a whole lot of question for me that he can come back and, be a full 3-zone player and play good defense too. But man, I really like Tim Stützle. I think the first, however many games it's been, like 15 or so of his career in Ottawa have gone really, really well.
Yeah, no complaints. One player, this is the last point we'll talk about with the Sens, then we'll get going on some other topics too. Eric Brandstrom. He
Yeah.
was acquired in that Mark Stone trade. He was the top prospect in the Golden Knights system at the time. He's had some flashes early on. I always say it's harder for offensive defensemen to gel and convert to the NHL right away, just because you're worried about making a mistake defensively. That's the biggest thing that'll get noticed. That's the first thing that'll get you stapled to the bench, is if you make a defensive mistake. So I always find those players a little bit more timid once they first come up. What have your thoughts on Eric Brandstrom been, who also, by the way, got called up the same night you did for
Yeah,
his
that's
first
right.
game this season?
Yeah, his first game of the season, because he had played about 30 or so the year prior. But I like him. He's still an exciting and intriguing player for me. He's a little undersized, so I don't think he's ever going to be like a rock solid defensive defenseman. I think for him, you just want him to not be a liability back there, which I think he can be, like good enough to not be a liability. I think he's got that potential. And then offensively, we haven't really seen Eric Brandstrom's full potential yet. I look back at his highlights in Belleville from the year prior. I've seen a couple of his games with the Swedish national team, of course, at the World Juniors, when he put up, I think, like 4 goals or whatever as the captain of the team in his second World Junior tournament. Everyone was raving about him because he looked great there. I think his game managed to translate to Belleville pretty well. I haven't seen it yet with the Ottawa Senators. So it's kind of the simple plays that I think he does a pretty good job of right now, making a straightforward first pass out of his defensive zone. I think when he gets more confident, whether that comes from him not being as afraid to make mistakes, like you said, defensively, or just feeling more comfortable with his abilities offensively too, I think once his confidence comes around, we're going to see him really take another step forward in his development. So it's still far too early, I think, to write him off as a player that won't fully fill out his potential, because he was a first-round pick of the Vegas Golden Knights. And I think when he came over in the Mark Stone deal, his stock was still sky high. So I still think he can get to a point where he's a really high-end offensive defenseman, but there's a couple things still that I need to see from him, and specifically in terms of confidence for him to actually be able to get to that point. It'll take some time. I think, like with a lot of these Ottawa pieces, it's going to take Eric Brandstrom maybe a full 2 seasons before he really kind of settles into his full potential with Ottawa.
As you mentioned earlier, when you were talking about play-by-play, you've already called about 200 games before you got your first crack in the NHL at that NHL level. You got any favorite stories of yours? Obviously, when you're doing the Steelheads or the Rams, you've also done some road trips. So
Yeah.
any favorite story of yours, doesn't have to be a road trip per se, but any memory that you have so far from your career that you look at and you kind of think about it from time to time and get a good chuckle or get a good some entertainment out of it.
Yeah, well, there's always a couple of good stories from Rams Live that you and I both have a good laugh every now and then at. But there's one. Well, I mean, the last time I flew out to Ottawa was kind of a crazy one. So I called the first ever game in the franchise history of the Belleville Senators, which was a preseason game against the Ottawa GGs. So I think this was about 2017. And I have some really good connections in Ottawa with the University of Ottawa GG's men's hockey program. Fantastic people over there, and I'm not really sure how it came about, but maybe I just asked. But anyway, they agreed to have me come in and call the game. So I'm like, okay, well, because I was still in class at the time at Ryerson, I'm like, the only way I can make this work and get up to Ottawa is if I fly. So I paid for my own flight. I went up on a Tuesday morning, flew up on game day. Had my buddy Carlos Verde pick me up at the airport, and I stayed at his place. So called the game. First Belleville Senators goal in franchise history, by the way, belongs to Ethan Werrick, blocker side on Anthony Brodeur. Never
There
forget
you
that
go.
goal.
There you
I,
go.
I got paid $15 to do the game. I paid about 250 minimum. It might have been even more than that for the flight. And then after the game, Carlos and a couple other buddies of myself, we went out to the casino in Gatineau to try and win back what I had lost on the flight. Lost even more and got about half hour of sleep. Flew back to Toronto the next morning and was in class again by 10 a.m. So
Yeah,
that was a bit of a wild do-it-yourself commentary story, but it was worth it for the memories, if anything.
yeah, definitely. The $15 won't get you too far at the casino. That's
No,
that's for sure.
I think I turned that into another negative 40. So
Oh man, that's funny. So we'll move on now, talking about some of today's action from the NHL. We were going to talk about the Lake Tahoe game between the Golden Knights and the Avalanche, but much like your NHL 14 abilities on PS3,
oh
all
man.
flash,
Oh,
all
come on.
flash. It looks good.
Come
You
on.
can't finish though. No,
Can't
no
finish.
finish, no
Can't
finish.
finish. That's ridiculous. If people had only seen the way that I dummied you in the last
Oh,
period, that third period of Vecwa versus HV71, you would be exposed as the fraud you are.
Victor, come on. That's
I,
if we got started on the larger sample size, I could go on for hours here. But nonetheless, let's get to the game that that actually happened, which was between the Montreal Canadiens and the Toronto Maple Leafs, a couple North Division rivals of the Ottawa Senators, and it was the Leafs winning 5-3. Victor, any big takeaways from you from this game? Austin Matthews continues his scoring ways. Montreal offense is kind of slowed down a little bit over the last 6 games.
as we all thought it would. I when they were scoring like what 4.4 goals a game, like that's just
Yeah.
that's not sustainable in the National Hockey League. So it doesn't surprise me that they've come back down to earth. I still think they're a better offensive team than what they've showed us here in the last little bit. I still really like Montreal. I think they're both really good teams. I think Toronto's a really good team, and I think Montreal's a really good team. I think I think their forward unit's a little deeper. Paul Byron and Arturi Lehkonen with Jake Evans on the fourth line, and Joel Armia back in the lineup. Like they have a deep bottom six in Montreal. I think their defense is pretty darn good as well. With how they've managed to bring in Romanov, and he's been great playing with Brett Kulak for a bit, and Victor Mete is kind of the odd man out here for most of the season. So I think Montreal's really, really deep, and they're just not playing to their full potential. Now, what I wonder with Montreal is, what did they say on the broadcast? Like 41 games in the next 78 days. Like that's going to catch up to you at some point. Like I get it. These are the best hockey players in the world. They're in great shape, but man, that's a lot of hockey to play in a short period of time. So I wonder what that's going to do to them. On Toronto's side, I think they're less deep, but their high end skill is right up there with the Edmonton Oilers as the best in the North Division, if not the entire National Hockey League, right? Like obviously everything Austin Matthews touches turns to gold right now. Mitch Marner looks like a wizard out there. Joe Thornton's been a great fit. Look at the two guys he's playing with as well, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, that doesn't, exactly shock me that a guy like Thornton, whose passing ability, at least in my mind, is still as good as it's always been. Like obviously he's not as athletic of a player. He's not as good of a skater as he was 10 years ago, but his passing ability is still right there. Like him setting those guys up is just a great combination. It's a lot of fun to watch. So I don't think Toronto's as deep, but their high end skill can get them through and carry them through. And I think ultimately, when it comes down to the playoffs this year, the story for them is going to be, are they able to keep the puck out of their own net? Like Freddie Anderson, when he's playing really well, is as good as any goaltender, but they need him to play super well, and they need their defense to be tighter in the games that matters most. So, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself and say that we're going through a kind of a cyclical history in terms of how the Leafs regular seasons have gone in the past, where they've looked really good at times, but when it gets down to crunch time, they tend to fall apart a little bit, specifically in the postseason. But I honestly don't think, Steven, that they're that much different than they were from a year ago.
I agree. I think the biggest difference is you look at the North Division, and no fault of the Leafs at all. Like they can only play with the cards they're dealt. But you look at the division they were in before the Atlantic, you had Tampa Bay Lightning, who won the Eastern Conference last year, and obviously the Stanley Cup, and the Boston Bruins, who 2 years ago won the Eastern Conference and made it to the Stanley Cup Finals. So Toronto was in a very tough division. And now I think you could say the reverse. I think this is a division, you look at a lot of these teams, Montreal has not had a whole lot of success in recent years. The Winnipeg Jets, they had that one run to the conference finals, but they still haven't had that breakthrough moment where they've been able to get to a Stanley Cup final. The Edmonton Oilers, Calgary Flames, these aren't teams that have made really deep playoff runs consistently. So Toronto is doing exactly what they should be. Now, like you said, when the playoffs come, things always seem to switch up on the Leafs, but I think they'll be all right. I think in this division, it would shock me if the Leafs didn't get out of the North Division and were
Right.
one of the final four teams, just from what we've seen so far. But I agree wholeheartedly with what you said. Can they hold up maybe once they get outside of the division? They'll only have to
Right.
beat one team outside the division in order to get to the Stanley Cup. So that's my biggest takeaway. If you were to pick any team to, let's say, upset the Toronto Maple Leafs, Victor, in this North Division, which one
Mm.
would it be?
Well, would it be an upset if it was Montreal? Like I,
I I think I would say so. The Leafs have put some pretty
mm,
good distance between themselves and the Habs in the
yeah.
standings right now.
Well, Montreal's also been off for a week
They
too,
have.
but
They
but
have.
I just I like Montreal's depth a lot. Like I think Montreal for sure can beat Toronto. I mean, I think Edmonton could too. Like it would, and that
Yeah.
would be crazy, man. Like if Edmonton beats Toronto, it's going to be a slugfest. Like the games are going to be 6-5, 7-6, whatever. Like it's going to be McDavid and Draisaitl going full tilt against Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner, which for hockey would be unbelievable to watch
So
that
good.
play out, right? Like that's not going to be a 2-1, Barry Trotz, New York Islanders grind them out type series. Like that would be just an absolute slobber knocker. So, um, yeah, I would say I think Edmonton would have a legit chance to upset Toronto. If you want to call it an upset, I would say Montreal too. And for me, those would be the two most likely teams that could do it.
It's funny. I on a recent episode of the show, I said the Winnipeg Jets because if
Mm,
Hellebuck were to get on a really
sure.
hot stretch, and if they can get a little bit more consistent defensive play out of one or two guys outside of Morrissey and Pionk, I think they'd have a shot. But I'd love to see McDavid, Draisaitl versus Matthews and Marner. Like just your best versus our best, and let's see what happens. Even
It would be old time hockey. Like
oh,
it would just, yeah. I think it would be great for the game. It would be so fun to watch. We even saw it a bit with Montreal tonight, right? In the start of that second period where things opened up a little bit and it was fast hockey and, like defensive hockey is a coach's dream, but, for a fan, it could be, a bit of a snooze fest. So I just think Edmonton Toronto would be a lot of fun for fans.
totally. And that's the way Montreal would win if they were to play the Leafs in a series. They'd have to lull them into these low scoring
Yeah.
games. Claude Julien loves rolling four lines when he's got them. He did it with Boston to a Stanley Cup. He's got four solid offensive lines, I'd say, with Montreal. They don't have the high end talent that the Oilers or the Leafs have, but they've got the four lines. They've
Well,
got, yeah.
with Montreal too, Steve, though, like this is a good transition team. Like they can skate, right? And,
Oh,
and Mark
totally.
Bergevin's gone on record said this team he feels like is good enough to play anyone's type of game, whether it's physical, whether it's slow, whether it's fast transition hockey. Like Montreal's a really good transition team. I just think Toronto's high end skill, if they get into like a slugfest, rock'em sock'em type game against Montreal, more times than not is going to win out.
Agreed. I think you need to have one or two guys that when you're down, you really need a goal. You can really count on them to step up. I think Montreal's
Yeah,
got that in Nick Suzuki, but I still think he's a little bit away. I think he is someone that a lot
I
of
love
people
Nick
a
Suzuki.
lot of people throw the Patrice Bergeron comparison when it comes to Suzuki. I
Yeah.
I, I don't see Bergeron, but I know what people are hinting at though, because he is strong defensively and he is excellent when he's got the puck on his stick. Didn't really notice him a whole lot tonight. I think if they can get some more consistent contributions from guys like Jesperi Kotkaniemi, who I thought played well tonight,
Yeah.
I think they could definitely make a push. They would have to have all four lines humming, though, if they were to upset the Leafs.
Which they can.
Now, they
I
totally
think
can. They totally can.
absolutely. Like if Montreal has all four lines going, like they're all good enough to be going at the same time. And yeah, I really do like Montreal. I think they're right there with Toronto, even though they're not in the standings right now. Like I don't think the discrepancy is very big between Toronto and Montreal at all. And I just think those two teams are more or less, a couple levels ahead of everybody else in the division.
Fair enough. We'll move on to the next subject. Some breaking news today. Former Maple Leafs head coach Mike Babcock hired by the University of Saskatchewan Huskies. Victor, you've obviously got strong CIS U Sport ties. What was your initial thought on the news that Babcock, who has pretty much as good of a coaching record as you can have in the NHL and at the international level, was going back to university hockey to coach here in Canada for a year?
Well, it came as for a lot of people, a huge surprise. I was a bit surprised too, because of the timing more than anything. I think it's interesting that Mike Babcock would commit to a program right now in a league that has no guarantee of a season for next year, right? Let alone this year. I mean, who knows? Someone asked me this today, like, what's my prediction for next season? I have no idea. Like no one at U Sports has any idea what's going to happen either, because so much of this hinges on where we are with the pandemic come summertime. So, yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of unknowns as to what the U Sports landscape looks like next year. So, let's assume for a minute, though, it does kind of go on business as usual, and things take a turn for the better. I think it makes a lot of sense for everybody, for Babcock, for the University of Saskatchewan. I think it's great for U Sports. That, everyone's talking about the university hockey level right now. Saskatchewan's getting a ton of press off of this. I talked to a few players today, and I've talked to some alum, and no, they don't speak for everyone, obviously, on the team, but the sense I get is that the community is just buzzing right now about the prospect of having Mike Babcock come back home and coach this hockey team. They love their own in Saskatchewan, and I think they're going to be welcoming him with open arms for sure. For Mike Babcock, I think this makes a lot of sense because this is an excellent opportunity for image rehabilitation. Given what's come out about him in the past, now he's going to go to a U Sports program, which, by the way, has a national championship caliber roster, I think, to begin with. They got to figure out the goaltending situation a bit, but I mean, no doubt in my mind anyways, that come next season, they're going to be a legitimate contender. So he gets to coach a team that's going to have a chance to win, and he's going to have a chance to try and redeem himself a little bit. I think right now he's kind of waiting for the right NHL opportunity to come up, that's a good fit for him and, whatever prospective team is looking after him. That doesn't exist right now. So this is an opportunity for him to get back into the game. And I think for Saskatchewan, you're going to get Mike Babcock on his best behavior as well. Like he knows that if he goes in there and it comes out again that he's not treating the players right, or we have this whole turmoil come up again, he's done. Like an NHL team's not going to hire him if he can't go to a university program and and not be a story and not be a controversial figure. So I think there's a lot on the line. Mike Babcock still has a lot to lose here, and that's why I think it's a great deal for Saskatchewan, because I think they're going to get him at his best, and ultimately, at the end of the day, I think everyone's going to win in this situation.
Totally. I'm a big believer in second chances, and obviously the stuff that came out about Babcock was not great at all, and it was definitely not good stuff to hear one bit. But he's getting a second chance, and like you said, the leash is short. There is not going to be a lot of leeway with how Mike Babcock conducts himself, especially, like you said, with younger players. He's going to be at the university level, and they're not professionals, right? So he's going to
but one thing to keep in mind, though, Steve, too, is these are young men, right? Like, these aren't kids. He's not dealing with teenagers here. I mean, some of these guys are going to be, older than players he had when he was, coaching at Toronto or Detroit. So, yeah, like these are young men between the age of 20 to 25, 26, give or take a couple years there. But I mean, look, it's as you covered this league with me. It's a legitimate hockey league with legitimate players who go on to be legitimate professional hockey players as well in post-university endeavors. So, yeah, it doesn't really surprise me that a high-end hockey mind like Mike Babcock would want to come and work in this league. Like there were about 3 or 4 years ago, when Lethbridge was looking for a new head coach after Spiros Anastas left. They were hosting the national championship. There was a high-profile NHL coach that was in the running for that job too, and ended up pulling out at the last minute. So it doesn't really shock me. Like, I was thinking of this morning, like, or this afternoon rather. I'm trying to equate this to something else that's happened in youth sports in the last 2 decades or so. And, it's not every day you get an Olympic gold medal champion and Stanley Cup champ showing up on your front door and taking the reins of your university program. So it's probably the biggest thing to happen in youth sports hockey in the last decade. But, the last thing I can remember that comes close to this is Mike Danton. Remember back in like 2005, 2006, coming out of his prison term, signed with the St. Mary's Huskies and went on to win a national championship with them in Thunder Bay and played 2 years for that program. And that was obviously a massive deal. That got a lot of media attention at the time. So I think this is probably the biggest thing, the biggest signing, recruitment, hiring, whatever you want to call it, that U Sports hockey's seen since Mike Danton.
Yeah, totally. It was major news. It was all over the headlines, which obviously right now U Sports isn't making a whole lot of because a lot of the action is sidelined right now. But Victor, that's going to do it for this episode of Late Night Hockey. Thanks so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. And now that the show's over, the compliments, all the
Oh,
talking you
man.
up, it can finally come to an end and we can get back to our normal ways. So, but all kidding aside, thanks so much, Victor, for being on the show.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun, Steve. Always happy to talk hockey, especially with you.
All right. Have a good one, Victor. Thanks again.